Bitcoin price is dependent on millennial adoption, right? Millennials have a larger percentage of their assets in digital assets versus traditional assets. It's dependent on the technology itself, the innovation of the technology. It's dependent on regulation, and there's regulation coming down the pipe. Here's the thing: crypto isn't correlated to any of that other stuff. It's 0.0 correlated to bonds and 0.15 correlated to stocks. Now people say, oh, no, from November to June, it was highly correlated. I'm like, yes. In liquidations, when everybody's being forced to sell assets, irregardless of price, to pay margin calls, right? Your Peloton stock that you bought on margin goes down 95%. You can't sell Peloton to pay it back. You have to sell crypto or gold or bonds. And so in liquidation markets, correlations go to 1, fine. But the long-term correlation of Bitcoin to the stock market is 0.15. Why? Because Bitcoin isn't dependent on the things that stocks and bonds are dependent on: economic growth, interest rates, corporate profits, right? Bitcoin price is dependent on millennial adoption, right? Millennials have a larger percentage of their assets in digital assets versus traditional assets. It's dependent on the technology itself, the innovation of the technology. It's dependent on regulation, and there's regulation coming down the pipe. So the return drivers have nothing to do with traditional economic drivers of stocks and bonds. That's why it's uncorrelated. And people say, oh, but it's dependent on the Fed printing money. No. 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin, right? Always will, always is. 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. But we don't price Bitcoin in Bitcoin. We don't price things in Bitcoin. We price things in the US dollars, in Israel in shekels, in China in renminbi, in Venezuela in bolivars. So if you look at the price of Bitcoin in those currencies, in dollars, it's volatile. But that's because the dollar is volatile, right? Sitting here in Chapel Hill, I'm sure yours is the same. According to Zillow, my house went up 40% in value in the last 12 months. That's bullshit. That's ridiculous. My house did not grow. My house did not get more efficient. In fact, it wore out. I had to put money into it to make sure it didn't devalue. So it didn't go up. What happened is the currency went down. The Fed printed 50% of all the money that's ever been printed in the history of the Republic from 2020 to 2022. Think about that. 50% of all the money in 246 years printed in 2 years. So the price of Bitcoin should have doubled, right? If you print twice as much money, price of Bitcoin should double, denominated in dollars. That's exactly what it did. It went from 10,000 to 20,000. Interesting. So people say, no, but it went to 70,000. I'm like, no. I mean, it did, but that was for a short period of time, and that was just excess speculation and leverage. Once you take that leverage out of the system, the value of the Bitcoin is double, from 2.5 years ago. Look in Venezuela, there's never been a bear market in Bitcoin because it's priced in bolivars, which have gone down 99.9999%. So it's always number go up. So we have to separate how we price assets. Like, look at the stock market. Stock market, all-time highs up until this year, right? No, that's because you price it in dollars. If you price it in gold, right, which is the only money in the world. There's only one money in the history of mankind, gold. Money is an asset that exists in the absence of a liability. Gold's the only thing that satisfies that. Bitcoin does too now. It's actually a digital form of gold. But everything else is currency backed by debt or credit. So if you price the S&P in gold, it's dead flat since 1997. Dead flat. Because they've devalued the currency, and that's called money illusion. And so if you look at the history of bad, dictators and bad leaders, what do? They replace capitalism with cronyism. They put all their friends at the top. They siphon all the assets into the 1%, and then they devalue the currency. And what happens? Those assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, all go up, and poor people get poor, like really poor. Well, how do you stay in power if the poor people got really poor? You buy them. You give them free money. In Argentina, they give them free electricity. We're talking about giving people, UBI or, money to, from the stimmy checks. So, in California, they gave people money for inflation. So you cause the inflation by printing money, and then you give people money to appease them so they'll vote for you. Look, 100%, I think we're in a bottoming process, right? I really believed up until, the events of the last week, I believed that the 17.5 wick low on June 13th or 15th, whatever day it was the low. Now I was wrong because I just didn't realize how much leverage was left at Alameda and FTX. I mean, they just lied. I mean, they lied. And the idea that they had only $1 billion of assets against, 10 billion of liabilities, it's mind numbing. So I missed that. I missed that completely. Now, the fact that we only got down into the mid 15,000s on that, I mean, in theory, if you look at the charts, right? As we were, making that lows around that 18,000 level, it was starting to look like another descending wedge. Right. And again, that descending wedge, if you break it, there was really not a lot of support until 12, 13,000, right? The previous kind of jumping off point before the big run at the end of 2020 into 2021. So I was pretty nervous about that if that did break. And so when it went into free fall from kind of 21,000 down to 15 after the FTX news, I was like, all right, here we go. We're going to test that 12, 13 level. We didn't. That's actually pretty strong. And I think what it's telling me is we are in this bottoming process, and crypto spring, again, is a bottoming process. So you go back to, December 2017 through kind of April 2019, we stayed at around, 4,000 for that 5-month period. And then we took off and went from 4, on up. And I think that's kind of what's going to happen here is we'll bump along here. We'll start to heal. My guess is first quarter next year is the beginning of crypto summer. The halving is January, February of 2024, I think. And it's usually 9-ish months before we get that next parabolic move. And, the speculators will come back. Their wounds will be healed and the gamblers will come back. I hope this time there'll be less leverage. I really do. I think, putting a lot of leverage on these assets is dumb, but hopefully they won't do as much. And so maybe the parabolic move this time is not as sharp. I know everybody says, oh, it's going to 250K immediately. I'm like, well, look, the model that I look at, the Metcalfe's Law model that I look at says 2024, the 100K level is certainly a possibility. My 250K target comes from the fact of digital gold, right? The monetary value of gold is 5 trillion, half of the total value of gold above ground. And, at 5 trillion, roughly $250,000 a coin. I used to think that was going to happen sometime over the next 3-4 years. Maybe that gets pushed out now. I don't know. But I'm pretty comfortable with this Metcalfe's Law model that my friend Tim Peterson put together. Great question. And I think definitely that is a chance. Look, will there be some emerging projects that do way better? Of course, right? Because they're venture capital projects. So they have a much higher risk reward. And, the risk is you go to zero. The reward is you could make, 20, 50, 100 times your money. Bitcoin's not going to make 100x from here. Do I think it could do 10x from here? Easy. Do I think it could do 50x from here? Maybe. 100 would be really hard. But I do agree that on a relative basis, there is a high likelihood in a highly challenged, then they fight you phase that the king, Bitcoin, kind of outperforms. And I think that this FTX scenario has laid bare the nonsense that was going on, where people were investing in the equity of business, getting a big pre-mine of tokens, putting a small amount of those tokens liquid, they called them Sam coins, right? I mean, he was just perpetuating fraud on massive scale, listing 1% of the coins to pop up the price and then borrowing against it as good collateral. I mean, FTT, the perfect example. There's no there. It's a total house of cards. And I think that stuff is over. I think the scam coins and the sham coins and the Sam coins, I think those are gone. But there are real projects out there. And look, I don't know if it's Bitcoin, Lightning, L3, L4, and everything's built on Bitcoin. There are a lot of people that believe that. I haven't seen any evidence that is going to happen yet. More likely, we have a series of L1s and there are bridges between them, and there are a lot of good L1 projects out there. But I can't guarantee which one of those is going to win. So I invest in both. And I think people should too. I think you should have a diversified portfolio. Concentration makes you rich. Diversification keeps you rich. Should we avoid the stuff that's going to be squarely in the crosshairs of the SEC? Yep, because that pressure is going to be relentless, I think, over the next few years. Should we focus our portfolio on a mix of assets that are uncorrelated to one another and have high probabilities of success? Yeah. So I look at Bitcoin, easy add. Ethereum, easy add, right? People say, it's a shit coin. It's a Ponzi. Well, if you call it a Ponzi, you don't know what a Ponzi is. Is it possible it doesn't work? Is it possible proof of stake is inferior to proof of work? Probably. I believe that. Is it possible that something else could outcompete Ethereum? Sure. But the reality is DeFi is real. Smart contracts are real. Most of the good stuff is built on Ethereum. So it's hard for me to say that that's just going to go away. Some of it going to transfer to other projects. Sure. But I can own those too. So I'm not, it's funny. I go to Twitter spaces at night just for fun. And I'll go to a Bitcoin space and they'll be like, get out of here, you shit coiner. Like, dude, I have more Bitcoin than you. Read the sign. And like, yeah, but you own Ethereum and you own all these other shit coins. I'm like, well, yep, I made a lot of money on them. So sue me. Then I'll go to a Ethereum set. And get out of here, you Bitcoin maxi. I'm like, I have more Ethereum than you. And again, I don't mean this in a braggadocious way. I'm like, I'm part of you, right? I'm part of your community. I mean, I have an NFT as my PFP because I believe in the community value of NFTs. We haven't even talked about that. And, I think NFTs are the future of ownership. Everything in the world will be an NFT, digital property right. So I don't know. It's just the tribalism needs to go away. We need to collaborate, not compete against each other. We don't need to drag each other down. It's not a zero-sum world, right? You and I go out with our spouses and I say to your wife, or, spouse, significant other, whatever, you look really nice tonight. My wife hears, I look like shit. That's not what I said. I said, they look nice. That's a plus. There doesn't have to be a minus. It doesn't have to be zero sum. And the world needs to be more positive sum. We can all help each other and collaborate and get wealthy together.